Under the bitter cold of December, James's small farm, once the place where his love with Dieppe first blossomed, now stood as a silent witness to a cruel test. Dieppe had accepted $20,000 from James's father to walk away from him, carrying with her the pain of sacrifice and self-doubt. Pressured by Mr. Tongue, Dieppe was forced into a painful decision as memories of Pal's cruelty returned, making her question whether their love could survive. Eileen's empathy was a rare source of light, but what would James do when he discovered the truth? In this chapter, we'll find out whether their love is truly over, or just beginning a new battle. Early morning at James's small company. A plain, single-story wooden building nestled among the fields of Tanmin village. The freezing December air slipped through every crack in the old wooden walls. The wind, sharp like invisible needles, pierced through the worn-out boards. Mist from the fields drifted in through the gaps, casting a pale, ghostly haze inside, dimming the already faint light of dawn struggling to break through the thick grey clouds overhead. The temperature hovered around 37 dF. The cold cut through even the thick grey work jacket James wore, stained with the reddish dust from long days at the farm. His hands trembled slightly as he sat across from Tuan, his long-time friend and manager of the lumber workshop, at an old wooden desk cluttered with smudged notebooks and ink-stained papers. The wrinkled pages, full of smudged numbers and notes in black ink, looked like a chaotic financial map of the hectic year-end. The tin roof overhead rattled in the wind, each clang sounding like the weary heartbeat of a worn-out soul. The smell of fresh-cut wood from the nearby workshop mixed with the scent of damp earth wafting in from the fields. The only sound in the quiet room was the soft crackling of a small heater in the corner, where weak flames danced, casting faint, flickering shadows on the wall. The light revealed James's thoughtful face and the slightly worried look in Ton's eyes. James looked up from the books, his eyes sharp but tinged with concern. His voice broke the silence, deep and steady, his breath turning to pale mist in the cold air. "Tuan, have you finished the report I asked for? I need accurate numbers to plan for the new year." Tuan, dressed in a faded navy jacket weathered by sun and rain, nodded. His rough hands flipped open the notebook in front of him. His voice was firm, but there was a hint of tension. "I'm working on it now. The revenue for the last 2 months hit 7 billion dong. We spent 2.5 billion on lumber and equipment repairs. I already gave 500 million in bonuses to the workers, so our profit is around 4 billion. Here's the breakdown." James nodded, flipping through the pages with slightly trembling fingers. His sharp gaze scanned the figures written in Tuan's slanted handwriting. "Good, but this notebook's too old, looks messy. Switch to a new one to look more professional. Send me the file on Zalo, I want to double-check it." Tuan nodded quickly, his voice softer. "Yes, I'll do it right away." James continued, his eyes narrowing slightly with suspicion as he looked up again. His tone was calm, but probing. "You gave the bonuses in cash or gifts? How did the workers respond?" Tuan replied evenly, "Both. Gifts and cash. They were happy, very grateful to you." James nodded, his eyes lingering on Tuan's face, still a trace of doubt as he asked again, slowly. "And the support money for the workers with cancer? How much? What did you do with it?" Tuan hesitated. His hands paused on the notebook, and his voice dropped. "I gave 200 million to 2 families, 100 million each for hospital bills and meds. They're struggling." James frowned slightly, his gaze sharpening. His voice lowered but carried an edge. 100 million isn't a small amount. Did you document everything properly? I don't want any trouble later." Tuan nodded, eyes briefly avoiding James's. "Yes, I got medical records, family photos. Everything's in order, just like you told me." James nodded again, voice steady but watchful. "Good, you handled it well. But I want you to look into other cases, especially the poorest workers. They need us most. But you're hiding something, aren't you? You've been off all morning." Tuan hesitated, his fingers gripping the table edge tightly. His voice shrank. "It's nothing. My mum also has cancer, but it's okay." He paused, avoiding James's gaze. James's concern deepened, unease rising in his chest. He's hiding something, not just about his mother. Could it be connected to Deep? Something's wrong. I need to find out. James didn't press further. He simply nodded, but his eyes stayed sharp. A storm of worry started swirling inside him, especially when he realized Deep hadn't shown up that morning. A dark feeling crept into his chest. Is Deep okay? Why do I feel so uneasy? A few miles away, at Tuan's small wooden house, where Deep had taken shelter. The cold wind cut through the rotting gaps in the wooden walls, slicing through the peeling boards like invisible blades. Mist from the barren fields outside crept in, veiling everything in a ghostly pallor, dimming even the pale morning light that struggled to seep through the heavy cloud cover. Deep sat curled up at a worn wooden table, her thin legs tucked beneath her on a mouldy, creaking chair. The flickering flame of an old oil lamp lit her gaunt face, the weak glow casting wavering shadows on the walls. Her eyes were red from crying, streaks of dried tears still marking her cheeks like scars of silent agony after a sleepless night. The freezing air pierced through her patched-up coat, the thin fabric full of tiny holes from endless wear. Her hands, cracked and calloused from labor, trembled as she hugged herself tightly, trying to keep what little warmth remained. Her heart was heavy with guilt. She had accepted the $20,000 from Mr. Tongue, James's father, in exchange for leaving him, to pay for her mother's urgent cancer surgery. The dried tears on her cheeks felt like invisible wounds carved into her heart. Her soul felt crushed by the weight of that decision. Her voice inside was soft but full of pain. I didn't want him to suffer. I didn't want him to be blamed or hated by his father because of someone like me. But why does it hurt so much to walk away from him? Like I just lost the world he built for me. Dark memories returned like icy winds slicing through her thoughts. Powell, her cruel ex-husband, roaring in a drunken rage, his voice filled with disgust. You're only good for working like a mule. Why bother learning to read? He tore up her worn-out notebook she'd rescued from the trash, its pages fluttering like fallen leaves, like pieces of her dignity crushed under his boots. His fists rained down like merciless blows, forcing her to cower in the dark corner of their shack, blood dripping from her lips into the rain-soaked dirt floor. And then, the voice of Mrs. May, her mother-in-law, sharp and merciless. Useless woman. If you can't give us a child, get out. We don't keep trash like you. Deep clenched her hands tighter, her fingers pale from cold and grief. Silent tears fell onto the dirt floor, forming dark spots. Her inner voice trembled, torn with guilt. I took the money to save my mum, but why do I still feel like I betrayed James? Betrayed the love he gave me, the nights he held my hand and helped me fight the darkness. She lowered her head. Her thin shoulders shook from the cold, her eyes blurred with tears, flickering like the dying lamp in front of her, swaying between light and shadow, just like her heart swayed between hope and despair. Inside Tuan's small wooden house, dim morning light slipped through the cracked walls, catching the mist drifting in from the fields and casting a grey gloom across everything. Tuan pushed open the creaky door, his old boots leaving tracks on the dusty floor. Pale light fell across his face, highlighting the worry in his eyes as he saw Dieppe hunched at the table. He walked over, his voice low but full of concern, echoing softly in the cold room. Deep, are you okay? James has been looking for you everywhere. His voice was shaking when he called me. He sounded like he was about to cry. Deep broke down, tears streaming down her face, soaking her thin coat, patched from years of use. Her voice cracked, almost choked by pain. I didn't want him to suffer because of me. I didn't want him to lose his family because of someone like me. Tuan sighed, pulling up a chair across from her. The oil lamp flickered between them, casting shaky shadows on the scarred wooden wall. His voice dropped, trying to stay calm. I know Mr. Tongue gave you $20,000 to leave James. Lynn told me yesterday after I called her. But why didn't you tell him? He deserves to know the truth. Deep's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white from tension and cold. Her voice came out in broken whispers. I need the money for my mother's surgery. It's over $20,000, and I had no other way. But I didn't want him to know. I was afraid. Afraid he'd think I'd betrayed him, that he'd hate me. I couldn't bear that. Tuan gently placed his hand on her shoulder, offering a quiet strength. His eyes glinted with understanding. James loves you, truly. He's not the kind of man to judge you for this. You have to tell him. Don't keep hurting yourself by staying silent. She trembled, tears falling again as her heart ached. Her thoughts screamed silently. Did I betray him? I did it for Mum, but why does it feel like I betrayed his love? Back at the farm, James drove toward the fields, his chest tight with anxiety. Something felt wrong. The land was silent. Di's slim figure was nowhere to be seen among the rows of vegetables. Her gentle voice, her soft steps, gone. He pulled over on the gravel path, dust rising around his truck like a veil. The front door of her wooden house stood ajar, eerily quiet. He stepped in, boots dragging dust onto the old floor. Her things were missing. Her books, her watering can, even the faded notebook he once gave her. It was like her spirit had left with her. Haki, the small dog, lay curled by the table, fur wet from the night's dew. His eyes looked up at James, sad and silent. His tail wagged weakly as if to say, "She's not here anymore." James knelt beside Haki, gently stroking his head. His voice trembled. "Haki, where's Diab? Where did she go?" There was no answer. Only the wind howling through the cracks, biting and cold. James ran outside, boots crunching through the frozen earth. He called out across the field. "Di? Where are you?" His voice echoed into the emptiness, unanswered. Panic gripped his chest. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed Lynn. "Do you know where Deep is? She's gone. Her stuff's gone." Lynn answered, her voice trembling. "Tuan just called. He said she took the money your dad gave her. Her mum's sick, cancer, the surgery's expensive." James went pale. His heart raced. He gripped the phone tighter. "Where is she? I have to find her now." "She's at Tuan's place. Go." James hung up, jumped back in the truck. Dust flew as he sped toward Tuan's house, mind spinning. "She took the money? Why didn't she tell me? I need to find her. She can't think I'd give up on her." He burst through the wooden door. Deep sat curled at the table, face wet with tears, shoulders shaking. He rushed to her, dropped to his knees, took her frozen hands in his warm ones. His voice cracked with emotion. "Pep, why didn't you say anything? I looked everywhere. I thought I lost you. I didn't know what happened." She sobbed, her voice shaking. "Your father gave me the money. I needed to save my mum. The surgery's over $20,000. I didn't want you to suffer. I didn't want you to be hated because of me." James pulled her into his arms, his warmth wrapping around her like a promise. His voice was firm, full of emotion. "I don't care about the money. I don't care what my father thinks. I just need you. We'll get through this. I'll help your mum. Just don't leave me again. I can't live without you." Deep wondered silently, her heart torn. Is our love really ending, or can we survive this? He still loves me, but do I deserve to stay? Hope and heartbreak swirled inside her like the dying oil lamp between them, wavering between darkness and light. James and Deep, after all the hardships, finally find each other again, but will their love truly find peace? Stay tuned for chapter 31.
Một sự thật dần hé lộ trong cô. Cô yêu anh dù nỗi tự ti vẫn như một sợi dây vô hình trói chặt cô lại. Liệu tình yêu ấy có đủ sức vượt qua những rào cản của số phận, hay chỉ là một giấc mơ ngắn ngủi tan biến giữa thực tại khắc nghiệt? Hành trình trong tập này sẽ mang đến câu trả lời đầy bất ngờ và dây dứt. Buổi sáng tại trang trại nhỏ, Diệp thức dậy sớm hơn thường lệ. Cô đứng bên khung cửa sổ cũ kỹ, nhìn ra khu vườn rau xanh mướt đầy dần nảy mầm, lòng chợt dần lên cảm giác bình yên hiếm hoi. Nhưng sự bình yên ấy nhanh chóng bị xáo trộn khi cô nhìn thấy dáng người đàn ông với nụ cười ấm áp đã làm trái tim cô rung động. Cô nhận ra mình yêu anh không phải từ hôm qua mà từ rất lâu, có lẽ từ khoảnh khắc đứng trước cô, bảo vệ cô khỏi sự tàn nhẫn của bao những ngày, khi cảm giác ngọt ngào ấy len lỏi trong vào lòng. Nỗi tự ti lại trỗi dậy như một con sóng dữ. Mình là ai mà dám yêu anh ấy? Một người phụ nữ nghèo khổ, từng bị chồng bỏ rơi, không cha không mẹ, mình không xứng đáng. Cô tự nhủ, đôi mắt mờ đi vì những giọt nước mắt kìm nén. Diệp bước chân ra, đôi tay gầy guộc ôm lấy mình để xua đi cái lạnh của cơn gió sớm. Cô cúi xuống nhìn Haki, chú chó đang vẫy đuôi bên chân cô, và mỉm cười yếu ớt. "Haki, bạn đã đói chưa?" Cô hỏi với giọng dịu nhẹ nhàng như nói với một người bạn thân thiết. Cô lấy chút thức ăn căn bếp nhỏ xuống, đặt xuống quan sát Haki. Anh ngấu nghiến với đôi mắt long lanh nhìn chú chó. Cô cảm thấy lòng nhẹ nhõm hơn một chút, nhưng nỗi dây dứt về giam vẫn không ngừng gõ cửa tâm hồn cô. Mình đã từ chối anh ấy, nhưng tại sao là mình đại đau như thế này? Cô tự hỏi, tay vô thức siết chặt mép áo rách như thể muốn bám víu một điều gì đó không thể chìm vào hố sâu cảm xúc. Cô thức dậy quyết định bắt đầu ngày mới bằng công việc quen thuộc, nấu ăn cho Haki, chăm sóc vườn. Khi ngọn lửa trong bếp bùng nhỏ bùng lên. Cô nhìn vào đó, tưởng tượng con mật dao hiện ra giữa những tia sáng nhảy múa. Cô nhớ đến giọng nói trầm ấm của anh, cách anh kiên nhẫn đến bên cô một ngày trong bóng tối, nhưng rồi cứ với lời từ chối hôm qua lại hiện về sắc nhọn như một nhát dao. Mình đã nói